Hello, my name is Ludwig prandtl. I was born on February 4th, 1873, to Alexander Prandtl and Magdalena Oysterman at my grandmother's house in Haus Strat 64 near Munich. Uh, my father was a researcher and studied milk production and wrote scientific papers such as the theoretical expected effect of creaming caused by centrifugal forces in 1877 and the effects of currents caused by heating or cooling milk in 1879. After my birth, my mother lost several children and continued to have miscarriages and stillbirths. Sadly, as a result of this, she suffered from a mental breakdown and was sent to a psychiatric clinic for 6 months. When she came out of the clinic and returned home, she remained in bed. She was always sad. After a period of time, she went to a nursing home. I didn't see much of her after that, but my Aunt Marie started to come around more often to help take care of me. My father taught me physics, and I loved to sketch while I was on vacation, and I learned how to play the piano. Here is a picture of one of my sketches that I drew, and here's a photograph of me playing the piano. I guess people say I was a smart kid. I remained a top student throughout my elementary education. As a young teen, my father sent me to a boarding school in Munich. He thought this would be a great opportunity for me. Unfortunately, while in Munich, the older boys bullied me all the time. It was miserable. I was miserable. I missed my dad, I missed my aunt, and I missed my grandmother. I wrote to my father begging for him to allow me to come home. He responded and asked me to try to make it work, to try to make friends. It was horrible. After 2 years of suffering, I finally convinced my father to let me return home. I was so excited. When I returned home, I made friends and eventually graduated high school in 1894, and then college in 1898 with a degree of mechanical engineering. It was hard though, because during my time in college, both of my parents died. I don't know what I would have done without Professor Foppel and his family. I later found that I later found this note that Ludwig Foppel, my friend and the son of Professor Foppel, had written about me. Note: my first encounter with Ludwig Ronald, which I still remember, was in 1898. The 23-year-old assistant to my father, August Foppel, he was invited by my parents to live from time to time to Sunday dinner. He also gladly stayed after dinner to drink a cup of coffee, particularly since he received motherly affection from my mother. This practical woman with a warm-hearted disposition took the young Prandtl, who was so alone and abandoned the world without female support, under her wing from time to time. She gave him practical suggestions, which certainly provided him with the valuable advice for coping with the problems of everyday life. His parents recently died. After working as Foppel's assistant, I had to complete my military training. This had been delayed due to my work in the aerospace field. After my training, I worked several places and eventually landed a position in working in the field of aerodynamics. In 1904, I received and accepted an offer from Felix Klein to work as the head of institute for technical physics at the University of Göttingen. I was very excited at the prospect of research opportunities, but not so excited about the teaching duties that came with it. In 1907, I organized the setting up of the wind tunnel, where I carried practical research results, where I carried practical results of my research. This led to a large aerodynamic laboratory, which was created and funded in order to support the German Army and Navy during World War I. From 1915, to 1917, I started to complete a more powerful 300 horsepower wind tunnel. It too was financed with war funds and intended to military research. This continued throughout the war and through the 1920s. My research included in 1904, my work was boundary layer theory. Boundary layer in fluid mechanics, thin layer of a flowing gas or liquid in contact with a surface, such as that of an airplane wing or the inside of a pipe. The flow in such boundary layers is generally laminar, is at the leading of an or upstream portion, and turbulent in the traveling or downstream portion. 1918, three-dimensional wing theory. The prandtl lifting line theory is a mathematical model that predicts lift distribution over a three-dimensional wing based on its geometry. It is also known as the Lancaster prandtl wing theory. Lancaster in 1907 and by Ludwig Prandtl in 1918 and 1919. After working with Albert Birz and Max Munthe, in 1924, atmospheric boundary layer. The layer of fluid directly above the Earth's surface in which significant fluxes of momentum, heat and or moisture are carried by turbulent motions whose horizontal and vertical scales are on the order of the boundary layer, depth and whose circulation time of scale is a few hours or less. My later years in life. By 1930, I was recognized and received the Daniel Guggenheim Medal. The Daniel Guggenheim Medal is an American engineering award established by Daniel and Harry Guggenheim. The medal is considered to be one of the greatest honors that can be presented for a lifetime of work in aerodynamics. I was so honored to be selected as its recipient. It allowed me to work with the world-renowned scientists and mathematicians. In 1933, when the Nazis came into power, they were keen to my research and the research of others. Like me, one of my colleagues, Heisenberg, although was not Jewish, he was frequently attacked for being Jewish in nature or having a Jewish style about him. I stood up for Heisenberg and others, including my colleague, Albert Einstein. Eventually, the Nazis left them alone and were able to continue with our research. In 1938, I attended the 5th International Congress for Applied Mechanics in Cambridge, Massachusetts, USA. While there, I met with G.I. Taylor and von Karman, among others and had useful dissections, although these discussions were very pleasant. In general, there was a difficult atmosphere at the meeting between the German scientists and the others, obviously because of the war in Nazi occupied Germany. I received a note from one of my new friends. This made me quite sad. Now I must ask you to believe whatever happens between our countries, the friendship and admiration which I, in common with aerodynamical people in all other countries, feel for you, will remain unchanged. I realize that you know nothing of what the criminal lunatic who rules your country has been doing, and so you will not be able to understand the hatred of Germany, which has been growing for some years in every nation which has a free press. When I returned to Germany, the Nazis investigated me. They said I did not believe in the Nazi German physics and German mathematics, and had spoken out against such political attempts to control science for their own ideology. Their report started, and I quote, Professor Prandtl is a typical scientist in an ivory tower. He is only interested in his scientific research, which has made him world famous. Politically, he poses no threat whatsoever. Prandtl may be considered one of those honorable, conscientious scholars of a bygone era, conscious of his integrity and respectability, whom we certainly cannot afford to do without, nor should we wish to, in light of his immensely valuable contributions to the development of the Air Force. When the war ended, I started teaching at Göttingen again. Although I was now 70 years old, I again began lecturing to students. Of course, Germany was now occupied by the Allies, and another difficult period followed. Although I had taken little interest in politics, I now became interested and joined the Liberal Party. In November 1950, I suffered a stroke and lost the power of one arm and a leg. With hard work, I eventually was able to walk again, but with a slight limp. 2 years later, I suffered another stroke, and after being a period with some improvement, my health began to deteriorate. Steadily. I died in 1953. I was 78 and a half years old.